Hi, it's Kellyanne Conway.
And I'm David Plouffe, and we have some surprising news. We're teaming up for a brand new podcast, The Campaign Managers.
I know what you're thinking. Why would Plouffe and Kellyanne do this?
Because frankly, Kellyanne, we disagree on just about every issue, except about what it takes to win a presidential campaign. Kellyanne ran Donald Trump's campaign. I ran Barack Obama's campaign. We understand things like early vote. We understand how to leverage an opportunity and how to play defense when you've made a mistake.
2024 is an election like none other, and David Plouffe and I are going to take you behind the scenes like no one else can.
We're going to lean into our one-of-a-kind experiences, really educate our listeners about what to keep an eye on, and discuss the current strategies and tactics that both campaigns are deploying on the campaign trail.
We're going to disagree, we're going to dissent, but we're going to deliver. You won't want to miss this unique pairing. Join us by listening to The Campaign Managers with Kellyanne Conway and David Plouffe.
The first episode is out May 22nd, available wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, Julia Cowley of the Consult joins us to tell us who D.B. Cooper really is. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my parachuting co-host.
Oh, that's a good one, Brett. Parachuting into the conversation today, though, is someone way more exciting than either of us, and that is former FBI agent Julia Cowley. Y'all, we are so excited to have her back. Look, she just might have to be a regular at the end of all of our longer series because, Julia, every time you come back, people immediately start chanting, again, again, again. We are so glad that you are back again for really one of our favorite cases, D.B. Cooper.
It's one of my favorites, too, and I'm glad to be back. I love coming on and talking with both of you. It's a lot of fun. I have a good time, especially on a case like this where there's no murder. It's nice.
That is true. Exactly. We enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah, it's refreshing.
Yeah, Julia emailing us to yell at us that we don't know what behavioral profiling is was really the best thing that ever happened to us. So really glad. She did it in such a nice way, as you can expect. You know, we all know how Julia is.
I was very polite about it. I'm direct, but I'm polite.
Yes. Well, Julia, you are here for one of the FBI's most famous unsolved cases, perhaps the most famous unsolved case of the FBI. There may be other ones. Be interested in your thoughts on that as well. And we're really interested to hear about this from a profiling perspective. Now, give me a little history of the unit. It was not around in 1971 when the hijacking occurred. Is that right?
I don't believe it was. I think it was more toward the late 70s, around when the Atlanta child murders happened. I think that was after it had begun to get started in officially as kind of as we know it today. So I'm not sure that anybody at BAU, or back then it was the investigative support unit, then it became the behavioral science unit. It's had a number of different names. Now it's known as the behavioral analysis unit, but I don't know if anybody ever officially looked at this case, a profiler ever looked at the case.
I've got to think that before the behavioral analysis unit, there were sort of the hostage negotiators and those kind of folks. And I've got to think psychology plays into their approach. Maybe there's a little bit of overlap there. And this was a hostage situation. We had a lot of fun covering this case and enjoyed it a lot. But, there were some people who were hostages here who probably did not enjoy it as much as we did when we were talking about it. I know the FBI became involved in this case very early on. Do you know the history of sort of the investigation itself, or is that something that's a little murky?
It's a little murky to me just because I wasn't there. But yeah, because it was a hijacking, or skyjacking, as some people call it, the FBI was involved right away, early on. I think one of the first calls, and helped get the money and get to the airport. And when he disappeared, they were part of the search. So they were there from the very beginning. And it was known right away it was going to be FBI led, and it would be our jurisdiction because it was a hijacking.
Now, was that the case with all the skyjackings? Because in doing our research for this case, we found out just how common skyjackings were. There were, 300? It's like in a year or so. I mean, it was just so prevalent. Obviously now, if we have a skyjacking, it's a huge deal, and it is not something that's like a almost daily occurrence. Was that the case back then, that every time there was a skyjacking, FBI would be involved? And do you have any insight kind of from that angle at a time when a very risky crime was almost commonplace?
I don't know. I don't know if we were involved in every single one. I can't imagine that a phone call at least wasn't made to the FBI, and depending on the circumstances, they would, make a decision if they were going to get involved or not. I know in my time in the Bureau, anytime there was a crime on an airplane, we were involved. I didn't investigate those types of crimes, but like even if it was a violent crime on an airplane, that would be the FBI jurisdiction. So that wasn't a squad that I was part of, but I know we were always part of those investigations.
So during your time, I don't know, did you ever have any involvement or training with the hostage negotiation side?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm really interested in that as well, and how maybe it had changed since 1971. So, one thing that happened in this case that I think might be surprising to people today is everyone cooperated with D.B. Cooper. They were allowed to land the plane, get the money, get the parachutes, and take back off. And I don't know that we would do that now. And I'm curious, in dealing with someone who has hostages, claims they have a bomb, they're ready to use it, what is the calculus that goes into how much do we give in to their demands and how much do we not?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. And a perfect example was the boy in the bunker was Alabama, right?
That was that case is legendary around here.
Yeah. I mean, that was a case where, we had hostage negotiators and BAU. I was part of that. But the hostage negotiators were really the lead in trying to provide information to the people negotiating with the suspect, the offender, to try to get him to come out, not hurt the boy he had kidnapped. But all in the background, the hostage rescue team was planning to go down and extract him. And, even though it seemed like sometimes the negotiators were making some headway, it would seem, okay, we really aren't making a lot of headway. And of course, the people who deal with crimes against children just kept feeling the longer and longer he's in there, the more danger he is. So the decision was made, we're going to go in and extract him. And I think every case is different when you have to see, okay, is it in our best interest? Is it going to save lives if we cooperate and give in? I think in the case of D.B. Cooper, they probably made the right decision. Nobody got killed. And he seemed to appreciate that they gave in to him, and he was able to get what he wanted with very little pushback. And it's hard to know how he would have reacted had they just said, no, we're not going to do that. I don't know. I think he went into that intending that he was going to get his way. I think he knew that, seemed confident in that. But I think it's a case-by-case basis, Brett.
And just on that's a case we should do. And now that I know you were involved in it, even more interested in doing it. The boy in the box case, for everyone who doesn't know out there, how did that turn out?
Well, the FBI's hostage rescue team went down, and there was like a tunnel, a very small tunnel. I think that was the size of basically a body. And the hostage rescue team member went down, and the offender shot up at him as he was coming down, and by the grace of God missed him, and they killed the offender and they saved the victim. It was amazing. And I was not there at the scene, but I'll tell you, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but we were in a conference room at at the behavioral analysis unit in Virginia, at our office in Virginia. And we were on the radio and we could hear, we're going in, something like that, the command to go in, and it was just silent. And we just sat there, and it seemed like forever, but it was just a matter of minutes. And then we heard he's been rescued and the suspect is dead. I don't know how to describe that feeling. I can't even imagine what it was like to be on scene. We were just in a little conference room, but to just have that message that they got him. And then I thought to myself, there are people that I know that went in that day knowing that they were going to have to kill somebody or they were going to be killed. That was their mission for the day. And I've never forgotten that. Not that I don't realize that every time the FBI does a mission, but that was so specific. They've been training for it. They built a replica bunker. I don't want to give it all away. And you know, I could probably get you somebody who was there actually, Brett, that would be better than me to talk about it. But they built a replica bunker and they had practiced and practiced and practiced, and they were ready. And it was just an amazing recovery. Just amazing. And the fact that they saved the victim and no law enforcement was killed was incredible.
And how long was he down there in the bunker?
Several days. I can't remember how many days, several days. Yeah.
That's
and he
incredible.
would communicate, the offender would communicate, and then he'd shut off communication. It was kind of back and forth. And really the negotiations, they weren't making progress, I think, is, you know, how it felt.
I mean, I think this is an incredibly helpful exemplar of how these hostage negotiations are incredibly suspenseful. You know, you don't have the hindsight 2020 situation. You know, we went through the DB Cooper case, and we did it with a lot of glee because we have hindsight of 50 years. No one died from it. We know that. If anyone died from it, it was at his own hands from jumping out the plane, right? And so we get to talk about it with a lightness that doesn't exist in these hostage situations. But at the time, when he passed the note to the stewardess that he had a bomb and that he wanted $200,000 in parachutes, thank you for telling that story, because it brings us back to the really seriousness of the situation, both on the plane and on the ground, which is it was no laughing matter whatsoever. An entire plane full of people could have been dead within a matter of minutes if the FBI or law enforcement hadn't handled it correctly. They didn't know if it was a real bomb or not. There are other ways to make a plane go down other than a bomb, unfortunately, as we've seen. So thank you for that story, just to bring us back to the reality of what DB Cooper was like at the time. And kind of with all of that in mind, I'm going to start with a slightly maybe easier question. A lot of people are like, why do you call this case DB Cooper? His name's Dan Cooper. No, actually, his name's not even Dan Cooper. So with that, when you are given a case where you know that the name is likely not the correct name, and you have the added kind of confusion where maybe media has interjected and now created a new name for him, right? DB Cooper they misheard him. A reporter misheard the name and reported it as DB Cooper. What does the FBI open the case under? Is it Dan Cooper? Is it, Dan Cooper, parentheses, misnomer? Is it DB Cooper? How do you even decide something like that? Because as we all know, a name is actually incredibly important.
Right. So the FBI has this pretty specific naming system, and they start with a subject name. And in this case, it's unsub and then AKA Dan Cooper. I think that was how they titled, if I can recall, documentation. But then ultimately when the FBI has, and then they'll have a victim, and they'll have the location and the office of origin. So there's a specific way that every case is titled. But if you have a big case like this, particularly if there's going to be a lot of leads, it's national, it's huge, they'll give it some name. And in this case, they called it Norjack, I think. Norjack. So that, like when like any kind of big type of investigation that is ongoing, especially if it's going to be something that they're sending out leads to other divisions, they give it a case title that's kind of catchy, so it just has a fancy name, and it's usually just something a little clunky, Norjack. So yeah, I
always get a kick out of that. Even now, all the different funny titles they come up with for the various investigations, it's always something to be like,
Miami
Arizona,
Blues.
yeah, tiger of the desert or something. Anyways,
What they usually do is take like two different words and combine them into one.
mhm.
So, and then sometimes you're like, what is this case? What does that mean? Oh, that's the Seattle case. So those are done. They get if they're called major cases, they get a major case title. And this particular one had the major case title, but underneath that major case title, then you have unsub, aka Dan Cooper. And I think he was always called Dan Cooper by the FBI because he's not really DB Cooper. That was a mistake.
FBI's boring.
I know.
Weird.
But I mean, we all know. But eventually you give in. You're like, nobody knows if I say Dan Cooper, so you got to say DB Cooper.
So on that, the name, as Alice said, to sort of like dig into your profiling brain, that is not his name. I would be shocked if one day we discover that Dan Cooper was Dan Cooper all along. Does the choice of the name, is there anything that you can get out of that? I mean, we know in this case, there has been some speculation that a Franco-Belgian comic book entitled The Adventures of Dan Cooper, which is about like a Canadian Royal Air Force Special Forces guy who jumps out of planes and stuff, that could be where the name came from. But beyond sort of that, is that something you would spend a lot of time trying to think about? Like, where would this name come from?
Well, I mean, just with that name, I think that's just a very common name, Dan Cooper. Maybe he knew someone named Dan Cooper. Maybe he knew two different people and combined their names. I don't know. I think it is interesting. I've heard the comic book angle. So when you think about that, oh, that could be it too. But I really don't know. There could be it could just be completely random. He heard the name Dan Cooper and thought, that's what I'm going to go with. And it's a common name and it's nondescript. And so it's hard to say. But yeah, that's something I would spend a lot of time trying to think about, as some of these people who study DB Cooper have, and they discovered these comic books and they're like, oh, that must be where he got this from.
What about, so his general demeanor has been something that people have focused on. And I think it's one of the reasons it's become such a compelling legend, is he's not this aggressive, mean jerk of a guy, right? I mean, he's described as, I think there are two aspects of his personality that are striking. Number one, how calm he was. He's described as being incredibly calm the entire time. And the second thing, how polite and considerate he was, other than the fact he's, got a bomb and he's hijacking the plane. He's very polite and considerate to everyone. What do those two things tell you about the kind of person this is?
Well, I think it goes in line with being mature and maybe having faced other stressful situations and he knows how to deal with them. That could be a possibility. It could just be a possibility that he doesn't really get worked up over anything. He's like a psychopath, or and his heart rate doesn't go up. He doesn't get too stressed. I mean, they did describe, I think, at certain points when things weren't quite going his way and it was taking longer than he thought it should to refuel the plane in Seattle. He was getting aggravated. But the one thing I did notice about him, he didn't have to be in complete control. Like, he was willing to negotiate. He negotiated a couple things with the pilots. Not a big deal, but he wasn't somebody, I think, that felt like his entire manhood meant he had to get his way with everything. So that tells you something about him. And I think that goes to a maturity that he had. I think that there's also some sense of there's certainly a fantasy at play here. I think he's trying to leave a certain impression and he's trying to act a certain way, leave that impression. And when things are sort of starting not to go his way, it starts to slip a little bit. He gets frustrated. So probably somebody who likes to be in control and maintains control. That's probably a real part of his personality that people that know him would recognize. This isn't somebody who completely loses it.
So this is kind of tied to this, his characteristics. And obviously we can all be either the best version of ourselves for a couple hours or who we want to portray, because this is going down in history. He knows that. And so every one of his movements is going to be recorded in either police reports or in podcast 50 years later. But one question that just keeps coming up in my head, and I don't know, I haven't settled on it, is he doesn't appear to be an awkward person. He seems to be self-possessed, self-confident enough to talk to a very good-looking stewardess, for example, not lose his cool, not be so nervous he can't talk to her he not forcefully, but he kind of firmly tells her when she puts the note in her pocket at first without looking at it. He says, "No, ma'am, you need to look at that." I mean, there's this sense of him where he seems to be a confident person. He wouldn't stand out to me as someone who is socially awkward or, uncomfortable in his own skin. With that said, though, based on his behavior and what you know about him, is this a loner, or is this someone who, lives a normal life, is integrated in society, maybe has family, maybe has friends, maybe has a job, and is just a shocker of this hijacker? And I ask that because we don't seem to have reports after the fact of anyone like missing. Like if he did die or he hid out for a while, there was no one who said, "You know what? I knew this guy named Brett and we worked together every day. And then for like 7 days straight, he just didn't show up to work." And the way he acts to me at least seems to indicate that he was tied to a social situation. Yet we don't seem to have a situation where someone is sticking out because they're no longer showing up to life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what kind of person this is with respect to his community.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he can be comfortable socializing with people and also be a loner. I mean, this is an interesting time of year to potentially go missing. And he had to realize, I may not show up tomorrow wherever I need to be, if I need to be anywhere. So you have to kind of think, did he have anywhere to be? Did he have something in his life where he no longer had ties to anyone? Was he just unable to make connections with people? Some of his personality suggests he doesn't really have a ton of emotion and doesn't react much. So maybe he doesn't build emotional connections, but he can go through the motions, and maybe he's not awkward around people. And I think too, part of it is the potential age difference that he had and much older than the people he was interacting with on the plane. So maybe that gave him a sense of security in terms of dealing with them, almost like he could be, depending on how old you think he is, depending on the descriptions. I mean, he could be old enough to be their father. So he may feel very confident in that kind of relationship, where he might not feel as confident with an interaction with a similarly aged male.
There's been some speculation, both because of the bomb, which I don't even think is really a bomb, but nevertheless, if it were a real bomb, and because of some microscopic metal filings found on his tie, that he was likely an engineer. Would that be consistent with the sort of demeanor that you're seeing on the plane? Someone in sort of more of a managerial position in work, or do you think that's kind of hard to say?
I don't think it's inconsistent with what we see. I mean, he's somebody who paid attention to detail, and I think he's intelligent. I think he knew how to craft something, whether it was a bomb or not. I don't think it was a bomb either, but I know there's some experts out there that would disagree. They thought it was real, but he knew how to craft something that at least looked realistic when he had to show somebody. And I think he took a little bit of a slight risk, that somebody wouldn't say that's not a bomb. I mean, likely he was going to encounter, just, statistically at the time, a female stewardess who was likely younger. He probably knew this and probably knew, if I just show some wires and a battery and some, flare sticks or things that look like dynamite sticks from cartoons, they'll believe it. I mean, especially if he's just showing them quickly. But yeah, I think it doesn't seem inconsistent to me that you might be dealing with somebody who had some kind of knowledge of science in an area of precision.
These days, a lot of people are learning about all the benefits of fasting, like weight loss, mental and physical performance, and gut health. But worry about the whole not eating part. Well, that's exactly why Prolon was created. Introducing Prolon, a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute and backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolong helps promote healthy blood sugar, support cardiovascular health, and reduce abdominal fat. But Prolong isn't a diet. Prolong is science. Science based on Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in medicine. And this all starts with Prolong's 5-day program. Snacks, soups, and beverages all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced.
Now, I can feel you guys out there doubting. Could I really do this? Could I make it 5 days? And I know you're doubting because I felt the same way. I didn't know if I could do it. I had done some of these fad diets before, and I thought, man, this is going to be tough. I was shocked. I was shocked at Prolong's 5-day plan. I was shocked at how good I felt and how good I felt at the end of it, because this is not a diet. It truly is science, and you will feel so much better when you finish with it. And it's no wonder why thousands of doctors now recommend Prolong to support healthy blood sugar and cardiovascular health. Right now, Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonglife.com/prosecutors. That's ProlongLife, PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors for this special offer.
What made you think that it wasn't really a bomb? Was there anything about the way he acted or the way he showed it that led you to that kind of opinion?
I don't think he intended to kill anybody ever. And that's pretty risky. I just think that that was just for show. I think he knew he was going to escape. I think he intended to. I think he wanted to. And I don't think he wanted to hurt anybody. He didn't come across in any way of truly wanting to hurt people. Now, I think he enjoyed the control he had over everybody and being able to kind of sit at the back of the plane and watch everything and control everybody and tell everybody what to do. I think he enjoyed that part of it, but I don't think he ever really wanted to hurt anybody. I mean, he let them go. And when they complied with his demands, he lived up to his end of the bargain. He let them go.
That raises a really interesting point. Obviously, BAU didn't exist back when this hijacking was happening. But if, as he's, taking these actions and BAU was there at the time and your assessment was, I don't really think he wants to hurt anyone, would the hostage negotiation go the same way that it did? Maybe they are planning to give him the money and the parachutes. They land the plane. He lets everyone off. I mean, I'm just curious because it seems like law enforcement gave in so easily and gave everything to him. The $200,000. They didn't try to skimp on that amount of money or anything like that. Would that, in today's time, I guess, as you're assessing the situation, it doesn't seem like he's someone who actually wants to bring harm to people. Would that change the course of negotiation, or it's just too risky? Even if that's your assessment, too much is at risk.
It's pretty risky. And I was never a negotiator. I don't have negotiator training. I know some of it, but I think it certainly could be a tactic to use in talking with him. If I don't think he really intends to hurt anybody. And it's good to have that knowledge. Now, whether you want to acknowledge that to him or not, I think that would depend on the conversation you were having with him. But there are just things that he did that just indicated to me he intends to try to get away with this. And he was never violent or expressed violence other than I have a bomb. And how many times have we seen people go into bank robberies and they say they have a gun and they really don't? I think this is similar, but you have to act like it is. I mean, that's the training that bank tellers are given. If someone comes in and even if they hand you a note and you don't see a gun, you comply. That's the safest thing to do.
It's interesting because at the time they didn't have the BAU, but I guess airlines had psychologists who worked for them for this very reason. And the airline psychologist was of the opinion that he was going to take off, jump out of the plane, leave the bomb behind, and blow the plane up. And I don't really know why he thought that, but that was what he told the airline. And that was actually relayed to the pilots because they were trying to get the pilots to leave. They're trying to get the pilots to escape through the cockpit, which they could have done, but they didn't want to leave Tina Mucklow, who was still on the plane, behind. So they were like, well, we're either all getting out of this or none of us are. Do you have any insight on why that would be the take from the psychologist, or you think that just seems completely out there?
I don't think it's completely out there. I think that you have to consider that. But I think there's also some things that maybe they didn't know at the time until after they conduct the interview. So I think you have to think he is going to jump out and leave. And I just can't even imagine the stress that the crew felt that's a lot of hours to be under that kind of pressure and stress. I can't imagine the trauma they suffered after dealing with that. But, the psychologist, I feel like, you have to assume the worst in a situation where you don't have all the information, and they didn't have all the information. I'm looking at this after seeing the interviews, and I know the ultimate outcome. So maybe I'm a little biased. Like, I don't think he intended to hurt anybody. I'm looking back at it. I'm not right in the middle of it. If I was right in the middle of it, I might have a completely different point of view on that, especially not knowing all the little details that came out when they interviewed the flight attendants and the crew.
And you're right. I'm sure it was incredibly traumatic. One of the stewardesses, I don't know that it had anything to do with this, but she ended up becoming a nun instead of continuing her career as a stewardess. I don't know that I'd ever be able to step back on a plane if I were one of the stewardesses. But now that we know, he didn't say in his note that he was going to jump out of a plane, but his plan was coming into view. He asked for parachutes, and he asked that the stairs be lowered for the second takeoff, and it all indicated that he was going to jump out of the plane. And in fact, now we know he did jump out of the plane. That's a pretty big splash of a crime with this type of a plan, because he clearly thought out what he was going to do, from his maybe fake, maybe real bomb briefcase to the note, all the way to the parachutes and jumping out of a plane, knowing the mechanics of this particular aircraft, that it could do that and he could jump out of it midair. All of these things kind of focusing on the complexity and the just really as shiny as it can get type of crime, I guess you could say. What does that say about his profile in terms of what kind of person plans this sort of thing and also carries it through?
Well, I think that he's probably, what I see, is somebody who needs a lot of excitement, and probably a lot of excitement doesn't get his adrenaline going like it would for I would never jump out of a plane, but some people find that it's exciting. I don't need that kind of excitement, but there are some people that require more. And I think that is part of it. He probably required more. It would be very surprising to me if he had not engaged in other adventurous behavior and other types of things to get his blood moving. Is kind of what I see in him, isn't it? Just an adventurous person. I use that term it's kind of too friendly of a term to call him, but adventure seeker, perhaps. It just probably is not the first time that he has done things that are very high risk. So that's what would tell me I'd be looking for somebody who has done other things like this. It kind of comes across, and this goes back to the impression that he's trying to create, sort of like James Bondish. And in one of the interviews, I think it was the ticket agent, when he asked his name, he said Cooper, Dan Cooper. And so I mean, he remembered that, and he remembered he had a pleasant voice, and he remembered that the way he presented himself. And then he's in a suit. And I know back then flying, you kind of dressed up. It was more of a special occasion. So it's not so odd that somebody would be in a suit. He could be a businessman, but he wears a suit. He wore the glasses, and he had the tie. But what's interesting is that the briefcase, one of the flight attendants had noticed, was cheap. She called it cheap, and it was, fake is what she said, cheap or fake. And then you had the clip-on tie from JCPenney. So kind of makes me think, is he really as sophisticated, or is he just trying to create this impression? And I'm not saying, I want to distinguish between somebody who is sophisticated all the time versus intelligent. So I think he's intelligent. I think he knew how to play a sophisticated part, but I definitely think he was trying to leave that impression. And then, passing the $20 bills and sort of, I don't have change for the drink. And so I think that that played into a fantasy, and this was the ultimate fantasy for him to try to pull this off. And I think it was just as much about that as financial. I think he was in it for the money too.
And the fact Does that, it's funny, I just feel like behavioral analysis would drive me crazy because I feel like every piece of evidence can go one way or the other. And we've talked about, maybe he's an engineer and maybe he's an adrenaline junkie and all such stuff. But is it also possible that he could be the opposite in real life, that he's not someone who's in control in real life and nothing exciting ever really happens to him? And like you said, this was all part of a fantasy to be in control and to do this daring thing that he never gets to do in real life. Is that possible, or do people not actually work that way?
Sure, they do. Like overcompensation or for their lack of control or their lack of feeling powerful or their lack of adventure in their real life. Sure, that's possible. However, he did it well. Whether he lived or not, he kind of had an idea of what he was going to do. And I think he did know what he was doing. So it tells me this probably wasn't the first time he jumped out of a plane. I don't think. So that just tells me he probably did have an adventurous side to him in some way, shape, or form. I think that's what I'm thinking about that. I don't think this was just somebody who never did anything like a Walter White and then all of a sudden he becomes a big meth dealer because he just had such a boring life. And so I think he probably had at least some kind of training or exposure to some of these activities prior to just all of a sudden doing this. That doesn't mean he wasn't, quiet and withdrawn and this wasn't some kind of overcompensation for feeling like he doesn't have enough excitement in his life. But I just think that he did it well and he seemed to know to some extent what he was doing. So it tells me he had some kind of exposure to skydiving. I think he probably had exposure to in some way. I don't necessarily know he would have been a pilot, but he seemed to understand the plane, its capabilities, what he would need in terms of the conditions of the plane to be able to jump out of the plane. He seemed to know that in a way that I just don't think somebody who studied up on it, who was a hermit and was in a library and just went out one day. I felt like he really understood this more than the average person would have, who just went to the library and looked it up.
So does that make you lean towards someone who worked in that industry or would have had that kind of more hands-on knowledge rather than someone who just did his research at the library about, what conditions the stairs can be lowered and at what speed they can fly and still be airborne?
Yes. I think he had some kind of training in aviation of some sort. To what extent? Because I'm not an aviation buff and I've never skydived, but I think he had to have some knowledge because he seemed to know more than the pilot in some regards. And the pilot's pretty knowledgeable and the pilot felt like this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And I think if you're in the same industry, you kind of would catch like, this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. What is he? But he seemed afterwards to say he really sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And it could just be a big bluff, but I don't think so.
I'm curious, do you guys, I know you've said many times that every profile is its own thing and it really depends on the facts, it's fact specific and all that. But do you guys also have sort of general profiles for like bank robbers? Like your average bank robber is going to be all these things and, kidnappers are going to be like this thing. And I wonder if you do, is there sort of a general profile for a skyjacker? And if not, for a hostage taker?
I don't have a general profile of a skyjacker. And it really does depend, Brett. I mean, the bank robbers come in all different forms. I mean, I know this from my experience in Boston. You have ones that are drug addicts and they just run into a bank and they put a note and they run off. And then you have other ones that are using blow torches at the ATM. And so you really have different levels of sophistication, levels of motivation. And I think it's the same in a case like this. And, I do think when you're talking about a skyjacker or hijacker, you're probably dealing with somebody who is an adrenaline junkie, is willing to take risks. But I mean, in other hijackers, I mean, they're not like DB Cooper. Other ones, they acted very different than he did. And so even amongst the ones who are going to do these very high risk crimes, you still find differences in their personalities. You may have some similarities. I mean, they're missing that excitement gene or something in their head where they just need more excitement. They need more adrenaline, and it takes more to, get them excited, basically.
What do you make of, so trying to think of motive, it does appear that he wanted to get away with it. And if all he wanted to do was get away with the money, it does seem like financially that's the motive. But at one point he tells the stewardess that he doesn't have a gripe. What does he say? He has a gripe against the
He doesn't have a
airline.
grudge against the airline. He just has a grudge.
He just has a grudge, right? Well, I mean, that's such an interesting thing to say, because it seems like whatever veneer of control he has, he's letting it down for a second to get into his inside. He didn't have to say something like that, but he does let that slip out. Obviously, we don't know what that grudge means, but I'd love your thoughts on what that statement means, why he would even say it.
Yeah, it really jumped out at me at first. I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. It doesn't appear like people who have more, I guess, like if he had a grudge against the airline, they make it known. He really didn't seem to have any kind of real grudge against anything. There's not a political statement he was trying to make. He didn't seem to be angry at anything in particular. He didn't make any statements about that. So I just, like when he said, I just have a grudge, it could just be, I just have a grudge against people. I have a grudge against life. And I just don't know if there was anything in particular he was talking about, or if he was just throwing that out there, kind of like, well, we all have grudges. I just have a grudge. But
Can I ask a stupid question? Because you're right. I've heard that before. I've heard this in our police reports when someone just says generally, I just have a grudge, and they really are talking about like in life. It's not fair. I can't make my rent or whatever. I've been screwed over by the justice system. But like when it's seemingly so unrelated to the crime, I have a difficult time, maybe just because my gene is like a rule follower. I can't imagine like taking out my grudge or my anger on something completely unrelated. Have you seen that? And how does that tie into kind of the psychology of, I just have a grudge in life. My life isn't turning out the way I wanted it to. I got broken up with by the love of my life. So I'm going to go steal $200,000 and jump out of an airplane. How does that work?
I mean, I think definitely something in his life wasn't going right. He wouldn't have done this. Like something was amiss, and he's like, I got to go do this. I got to steal this money, and maybe it was purely financial. Maybe he was in dire straits. He needed money. I think it's more than that. I think it was way more than that, because this was such a daring and kind of complex type of crime. So I think there's much more going into it. I think it's a combination of fantasy. He may not have really even needed a lot of money, but I think he enjoyed getting money. But I don't see something like specific with him. It could be somebody broke up with him, and now I'm just gonna go do this now because I might as well, or I lost a job, but he doesn't come across as a particularly angry person, and he doesn't make any statements. He doesn't make any comments. He doesn't want or appear to hurt anybody. He doesn't seem to care too much if he's scaring them. He's certainly trying to scare them, but it's really just enough to maintain control and enough to get what he wants. But in terms of having this big grudge, I don't know that it's there. And I kind of wonder if he just was just sort of like, yeah, I just have a grudge. And what that is in particular, I don't know what it is. So I think it's really interesting. I'd love to know what he meant, because it's one of the most interesting things he says the whole time that he's on the plane, I think. But I don't want to read too much into it, other than maybe he's just being kind of, serious.
So Ralph Himmelsbach, who was the FBI agent who started the case and followed it until his death a couple years ago, he famously would say that he didn't think it was anyone from the airline, and they never really investigated whether it could be an inside job or whether it could be someone involved in the airline industry, because, and I don't really understand why I said this, but because airline people are, they're all good, honest, hard workers, and they would never do something like this. I assume you don't agree with that. I always felt like that was a big blind spot for him.
Yeah, I don't I don't see how you can just rule out airline people just because they're all good people. I don't know that. Are they? I don't know. I don't think any industry you can say they're all good people. Not even the FBI can say we're all great people. So he had knowledge. I can't imagine he hasn't had some kind of exposure, is I guess the word I'll say, to the airline industry, more than just a casual reader of library books. He was too comfortable. He knew what he was talking about. He corrected the pilot on something the pilot didn't even realize. And the one thing I will say that I thought was interesting is, and this could just because he didn't care because he was not planning to ever go to Mexico, but he didn't seem to realize that they were going to have to stop. He said, we're not going to stop again in the US. We're going to go all the way to Mexico. And I don't think he ever planned to really go to Mexico, but it's almost like he didn't realize, based on the conditions he set to fly the plane and the distance from Seattle to Mexico, they weren't going to make it. And it almost made me think, okay, maybe he's not actually a pilot or familiar with this particular model, maybe, but he knows enough. So maybe mechanic would probably know that stuff. So that did make me question, like, okay, how much does he know? Or is he just saying, just get me to Mexico? When they say, we can't fly that far, he's like, oh, okay, well then let's just go to Reno. So that made me kind of question, okay, does he know, does he have a different area of knowledge other than actually being a pilot? Maybe, I don't know all the different things you could do. I mean, there's probably a million different jobs in the airline industry where you would have the familiarity that he had, but it made me wonder, had he ever really flown a plane? But what I did feel that he had knowledge of conditions to jump. So I think and that may be where his knowledge of planes came from, is because, had done some skydiving in his past.
Guys, they're back. One of our favorite sponsors, HelloFresh, where you can get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Ditch the meal planning woes and dive into HelloFresh's biggest menu yet, with over 45 recipes and even more market items to choose from every single week. You will be able to make restaurant quality meals at home without the high cost of takeout. Plus, HelloFresh's new Ready in 20 recipes are on the table in just 20 minutes. That's even quicker than delivery.
HelloFresh is such a lifesaver for me because I work all day and still have to get dinner on the table for my hungry kids. And you know what? Recently delivered right to my door on one of those hectic days when I didn't know when I could make it to the grocery store was an amazing street taco recipe. The ingredients were fresh. It was delicious. You guys know I'm a Texas girl. I take my tacos seriously, and these street tacos were amazing. My kids truly gobbled them up. HelloFresh's pre-proportioned ingredients help reduce food waste by up to 45% compared to grocery shopping. And on average, HelloFresh meals have a 31% lower carbon footprint than meals of the same proportion size. You're going to want to join us at HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/ProsecutorsSWEET for free dessert for life. One dessert item per box while subscription is active. That's free dessert for life at HelloFresh.com/ProsecutorsSWEET. And find out for yourself why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
So, I feel like you've been doing this the whole time, but to sort of kind of wrap it up as we get towards suspects. So you've mentioned a few things. You've mentioned that statement about the grudge. You've mentioned the fact he didn't know about Mexico. I guess a two-part question. Number one, are there other things that stood out to you that would have been a jumping off point for your investigation? And the second thing, in general, if you were creating a profile of this person, what profile would you create and what would be the main things that you would build that profile on?
Oh, that's a loaded question, all of that. So, the first thing, I just kind of just start with just my impressions of him. And I think he's educated. I think, he's had schooling. He's mature. So, anytime, obviously the witnesses put him at an older age. And so if you're coming up with suspects that fit everything, but he's older, I would tend to agree that the suspect or the witness statements are right. He's probably a little bit older based on the terminology and the language and the interactions that he had with people. I do think he's probably a little bit older, mature, and he was described that way. But, you know, you always have to be a little bit cautious with eyewitness statements or eyewitness accounts, but definitely older, mature. And the one thing I think too is that this sort of, you know, he's trying to come across as maybe a little better off than he is, I think. And it doesn't mean that he hasn't had education or something, but I just don't know, like, in his real life, if he is as sophisticated he was trying to be. You know, there's definitely, as I mentioned already, the briefcase and the tie. You know, he's trying to look a certain way, but they really weren't expensive items. So you have to kind of wonder, is he just get dressed up for this moment to create this perception? And so I have to wonder if that's how he is in his real life. Is he trying to create a perception of somebody that he really isn't? And why was it important for him to portray himself that way? I think he definitely wanted to be memorable. And he did little things to try to do that, like paying for a drink. He didn't have to order a drink, but he paid for a drink with a $20 bill. That's memorable back then. It would be like paying for a drink now with, you know, $100 bill. I'd say, I don't have anything less. So, I mean, that stands out. Like, they're going to remember that he did those things to try to be memorable. The other thing that I thought was notable is I think he's evidence conscious as well, which puts him in more sophisticated, because he asked for the notes back, the original note and the note that he had the flight attendant write out with instructions for the pilot. And she wrote that on the envelope that the original note came in. He asked for that back. And when she tried to discard one of the matchbooks, he asked for that back. So I was wondering if perhaps the note is similar to, you know, what a bank robber would do. And so I would consider at the time maybe looking at people who had passed notes or ever been convicted of note jobs of some sort, particularly where their fingerprints, you know, because he seemed evidence conscious about that. Like, that's why I was thinking that maybe that's why he's asking for those items back. And of course, he left his tie and cigarette butts, but at the time, who would have thought you're going to get DNA off those? I mean, that wasn't even, nobody thought of that back then, but definitely people thought of fingerprints. And so I would wonder if he had a criminal history where there was some other type of crime where he passed a note, or maybe he just is mature and smart enough to know they can get fingerprints off these items.
So, of course, you're able to take kind of what limited information we have and build this amazing profile about who this man is. Obviously, every case is case by case, and this is, you know, more than 50 years later. But why do you think this particular case has never been solved? Why? I mean, I think they investigated 800 suspects, and they're not closer, really, at least from the public records, to any particular person, even though documentaries and podcasts will have their favorite suspects. But it seems like we have a lot to go by. He was with people who were let go, who survived, who were able to talk about the person they spent hours with. Yet we know almost nothing about him, and he's not only never found, but never identified. And, you know, there's been no arrest in this case. Why is that? And would it be different today?
I think it would definitely be different today, just because of the amount of security we have and the amount of cameras we have and all of that. But I think that he thought about this for quite a while. And when I think at some point he told one of the flight attendants that, you know, that he picked the airline because it suited his time and place and location, something along those lines. That's not verbatim, but so I think he thought about this. I think it was well planned out, and I think that's part of the reason why it went so well. There's part of me that wonders if leading up to all of this, he didn't start to distance himself from whatever his normal life was in order to not be missed if he didn't come back, or there's just something there that where, this is the day before Thanksgiving. And if he didn't make it or got delayed or something went wrong, he wasn't going to be there the next day. So you have to wonder, did he have anywhere to be? Did he have a family, or, had he separated from them? But that could have been part of the plan. And I think it was well planned out, and that's why it did go so well for him. And a little bit of luck involved as well. And then certainly having never found him. And I was telling both of you before we were recording that I was debating with a colleague, and my colleague's like, he did not die. They didn't find his body. And I'm like, yeah, but so I'm from the Northwest. I know this area well. And so DB Cooper is he's legendary in my neck of the woods. And I grew up with the story, but that area is very treacherous. And so he could have landed, especially at the weather, and it was cold, even if he was experienced to some extent. And I think just never finding him, and maybe if his body just was never found, that's another reason why it's never been solved. Whatever family he did have, if he did, they maybe just weren't close enough with him anymore to realize he just disappeared and fell off the face of the earth. The other explanation is he got up after landing and walked to where somebody was picking him up, or where he left his car, and drove home with the money and had Thanksgiving right on time after his business trip.
Just a little bit wet.
Yeah, just a little wet. I'm sure he had his, clothes in the car, his regular clothes. So I don't know.
Let's assume that's exactly what happened. He landed and he went back and had Thanksgiving dinner. Is a man who jumps out of an airplane like this, with all the fanfare and this huge big thing that he's doing, is he someone that, assuming he didn't get hit by a truck, who is going to go to his grave without ever sharing the fact that he is DB Cooper?
Yeah, quite possibly. There's a kind of a subset of psychopath. I wouldn't necessarily call him a psychopath. I don't really know. I can't diagnose people, but people that love to fool other people. They like to have secrets. It's important for them to keep their secrets. Israel Keys, perfect example. Those secrets, those were his, and that they were very important to him. I don't want to compare the two, but I just want to say that not all people who commit crimes or do spectacular things need to be recognized. Sometimes it's just enough to know, I've got a secret you don't know. And we see that all the time with criminals, especially like violent criminals. That's, they like to keep secrets. Cooper's delight, I think is what it's called. So yeah, somebody could just keep this secret, knowing I committed this. I'm DB Cooper, and nobody's the wiser from it. Probably gets quite a bit of joy knowing that.
What about the flip side? We know now that many people have confessed on their deathbeds to loved ones that they are in fact DB Cooper, and clearly they are not. It's, demonstrably false. This is not about DB Cooper's profile, but all these other people, and this is applicable to a lot of other cases where we have false confessions. We know what leads someone to claim, obviously DB Cooper is a famous one, but to falsely confess, use their one opportunity on their deathbed. There's not like another deathbed, that you're going to get to their loved ones to tell them something false. And, just what do you make of that? Because I do think a lot of people think, well, I don't know, they confess, so must have some ounce of truth to it.
I know. I don't know why people do it. People confess to things like that all the time. I can't tell you how many calls we get to the FBI with false confessions, or it's hilarious. People think that this doesn't happen, but they do it all the time. And I think sometimes it's maybe the result of, mental issues, and other times it's just, I just like to tell lies. I'm just going to do this, on my deathbed and admit to this. And I think it's pretty funny.
You're going out with a bang.
Yeah,
really is a bang.
I'm going to leave it, this is going to be my legend here. So Yeah, but I mean, I would love him to confess. That would be great if he's still alive. I mean, the FBI's official story is he's dead. I tend to lean toward he probably died that night, and but people smarter than me think he made it out alive, and that some of the experts say it can happen. Other experts say no. So
Well, assuming he didn't die that night, I feel like somebody didn't get the memo. We're big DB Cooper made it fans here, Julia. You're harshing our buzz or whatever. Assuming he didn't make it, just some of the more famous suspects. And I know it's not like you're a DB Cooper expert or anything, but you got Richard McCoy Jr., who's the copycat who pulled off a similar stunt a few months later. Sheridan Peterson, who was a skydiver. Robert Rackstraw, criminal extraordinaire.
I think they proved that one. Somebody proved that wrong, right? I don't know all the stuff. I know McCoy, and there's something I read about him. And I'm like, this is not the same guy. Either that or he changed his personality totally. And I mean,
right.
And again, a caveat: behavioral science is not a hard science, but like comparing the two personality, I just didn't think McCoy really would fit what I would think.
He's also too young. He was in his 20s.
See, I do think that the eyewitnesses were correct on the age, and by his presentation, he comes across as being older, more mature to me. So I think that he probably was older. Yeah, Barb Dayton. I don't think that one. I think no, not Barb Dayton.
What about Kenny Christensen? Do you know about Kenny?
Is he the pilot? Was he a pilot or?
He worked for Northwest Orient Airlines.
Was he bald?
He was.
Okay, I don't think it's him.
Just because he was bald?
I don't think the description is right. Okay, I already.
Okay, let me ask a slightly different way.
I don't know. Okay.
We talked about there's obviously fan favorites, movies, books written about specific suspects, 800 plus suspects that are probably in the FBI file. Do you think DB Cooper's any one of those 800?
Probably not. I don't know.
Back to square one.
Yeah.
Such a knock on the FBI's investigative abilities that all 800 people they looked at, none of them are DB Cooper.
Well, some cases they're right there. They're right in the file at the very beginning. And there's others like Joe D'Angelo, who was never on the radar, and they had like 7,000, 8,000 suspects they checked out. I mean, it was incredible. And you would have thought, at least in all of those, he would have showed up, and he didn't. So I never know. But I tend to believe probably not one of them. But
can I dig a little bit deeper? Why?
Yeah, I don't know enough about all the suspects. So
I tend to agree with you just because there's been so much attention on this case. This was not a lack of resources or interest type of case. And so I feel like if there's a file on them, I mean, they've been looked at, and there are so many, even the popular suspects that get all the airtime. There are clearly very big problems, and why no arrest was made in that case. They had an alibi, or things have popped up in their cases that just don't support them as being DB Cooper, and those are the ones that are fan favorites, And so I tend to agree with you that I don't know. I think this guy he's like a master of disguise. He might just be walking among us as a 95-year-old counting his $20 bills.
One thing that's interesting to me, and Julia, you may know some examples of this. Number one, I will just note that in the early FBI files, they said that they thought he was actually bald. I'm just putting that out there. For the bald doesn't necessarily exclude him. But it's interesting. We went through a whole bunch of suspects. I'm no expert on DB Cooper, so maybe there are suspects. I don't know of any suspects that were ever identified who disappeared right around then. I was always surprised there wasn't more. In fact, when we went up and talked to Lidditz Elementary, one of the things we said to them, if you want to solve this case, don't worry about all the famous suspects. Try and find people who vanished right around Thanksgiving at that time and match the description. I don't know of any suspects who fit that profile. Are you aware of any? Because that would seem to be an obvious thing, since I don't think he died that night, but there's a strong possibility he did. It may even be more likely than not that he did. And so that would seem to be an obvious place to look, but I don't know of any.
Yeah, missing person files. Look at those. Go back to that time frame and look at, okay, who disappeared, and was there a report done on them, and do they fit the description, or were they out of town? I mean, whatever. I think that would be another avenue of investigation. But And I don't know I just know who some of the main suspects that have been investigated, like the ones we've just mentioned, but I don't know enough about them to really say, oh, that's a really good suspect, just based on the way that this person committed the crime and what I think are his true personality characteristics.
So fast forwarding to, I think, 2016 or so, the FBI officially makes an announcement that they're no longer actively investigating the case. Can you speak a little bit about the decision to close a case or to no longer consider an active investigation? Make a statement, like a public statement about it, because you and I both know that hundreds of cases are closed all the time, and there's certainly nothing public about it. So can you talk a little bit about what that meant for this case, why publicize it, and are we ever going to be able to solve this? This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Huggies knows that babies come in all shapes and sizes, and their tushies do too. Huggies Little Movers, with its curved and stretchy fit. Moms know that there's nothing worse than an ill-fitting diaper, especially for your active babies. I love Huggies because I can rely on them to keep my baby covered while she moves around. You guys have heard about my sweet little baby. She just turned 1, deep into mobility. I am so excited about Huggies Little Movers because she can roll around, jump around, climb, which is everything she's doing. And I know that she is covered, and so am I in the cleanup.
And we all want the very best for our babies, and that's Huggies. Huggies Little Movers are curved, so babies feel comfy no matter how much they're moving around. And they're moving around a lot. They also offer up to 12-hour protection against leaks, which is a game changer. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play in comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
I don't know why they did that. I think probably two reasons. I think one of the reasons where they were going to start working with maybe outside resources and bring in like maybe non-law enforcement and just, see if any, sleuths, could help with the investigation, people that weren't part of the investigation. And then possibly to just say, hey, you can come forward now. It's closed. We're done. I don't know. I don't understand how you really ever close it. It's probably been inactive until a tip comes in, you go check it out. I mean, it doesn't, like, there's no reason to just announce. I don't understand why that was done, because even if they got a tip and they've decided it's closed and we're not actively looking at it, they're still going to go out and do it. And I doubt that a case agent was spending every single day, day in and day out on this particular case in 2016. What could be going on? Not much, so I don't know why they did that as maybe another way to generate some publicity, bring people forward, make a big splash and say, we're done with this. But, that just brought a whole bunch, new attention to it, actually. So quite genius now that I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
the BAU suggestion.
There you go. Yeah, it's reverse
You want to draw
psychology.
attention and say you're closing it, and then
Giving
everybody will
away
come
all
forward.
the secrets of the FBI.
Well, cold water consulter Julia with a scoop. D.B.
Yeah.
Cooper died that night.
Oh, I don't
Mm.
know. Yeah, I don't know. I
Look,
really
you're-
don't.
you wouldn't be the only cold water theorist here, because that's what I think happened.
Yeah.
I think that's why he
I
wasn't
don't.
found. He wasn't some like, I think he was smart. I think he thought this through, but I think a person who survived that, something would have come out, whether someone saw something, heard something, he said something. But I think the fact that it's such a mystery is actually pointing to the fact that he never made it out of the forest, river, wherever he landed.
Yeah.
Whatever. If 90-something
Probably.
DB Cooper is listening to this episode, write in prosecutorspod@gmail.com and tell us.
Direct it to
why
Brett.
this is right.
Direct it to Brett.
I
Well,
want him to
Julia-
write to me.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. There you go.
Here,
Just
be
send
a
me a
guest
letter.
on the consult.
Yeah. Let me
That would
just
be
tell me,
fun.
just send me a letter. Am I right or wrong about you? Did I get you all wrong, DB? Please, Dan.
Dan, yeah. Write it with a
Send-
felt tip pen.
Send me a letter and tell me if my profile is right or wrong. That's all you have to do.
Just a checkbox. Yes, no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yes or no.
Yeah. Don't lick the envelope either.
How they get you? How they get
And
you?
they supposedly have DNA on his tie.
Yeah, but they're not sure it's his.
Yeah.
They're very negative on that. I don't know if that's because there were a lot of people in the FBI who really wanted it to be McCoy, and the DNA didn't work out, so it might be that they don't want that to be the case. But
Yeah.
Well, I think we're as close to solving it with you as ever, which is to say not. But I think
We're not.
that's why it endures as one of, the most famous cases in history. So I
Mhm.
don't know. I always love hearing you talk about it. You made me think about things about him that I hadn't thought of before. And if only we had the BAU and you on site 50 some odd years ago, maybe
Right.
he would have been caught.
I like to
Absolutely
think
right.
that, most of the time we build up these criminals and we're like, they're just not as great as we thought. Or as smart as we thought. And I do tend to think he is probably more intelligent than our average criminal. And if we find out who he is, we'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's got a degree from here and he's studied here. I tend to think that that's probably, when we do find out who he is someday, we're going to be like, that's just what I thought. He's smarter than the average criminal.
well, Julia, we always appreciate your insight. If you're listening to this and thinking, wow, that was so interesting, so much more interesting than the average prosecutor's podcast episode. I wish I could listen to Julia all the time. Well, you're in luck because Julia has her own podcast, The Consult, Real FBI Profilers, where it's not just Julia, but several FBI profilers all in a room. It's as if you're in the BAU listening to how they work. So if you're a fan of that kind of thing, you loved Mindhunter and all that stuff, you got to listen to The Consult. You're going to love it. When are you guys going to do DB Cooper?
I don't know. We
gotta
might
add
have
that
to
to the
do it. It
list.
kind of seems like we keep doing cases that you guys are doing. It's a total coincidence, but
They're
now
just
I
interesting cases.
I come on here and it's really just me. It is just me, and I do better when I have my other colleagues because they think of things I never thought of, and it's a much better process, I think, when we have a whole group. So I think I would love to do this case with them and see their thoughts. In fact, as I mentioned, I was talking to one of them and he thinks DB Cooper is alive. So, and I value his opinion greatly. So, so you can already see we have a difference of opinion, but
There you go. My favorite profiler on the console.
yeah.
I'm Team Julia.
Oh, there you go. Well, before we leave, Julia, we always like to ask a question. Are you willing to answer one of our listeners' questions?
Sure.
So,
She
if you're
said,
out- she was like,
I don't know what I'm agreeing to.
yeah.
Sure.
So if you're out there
Yes.
listening and you leave a 5-star review and you leave a question, we will answer it for you live on the show. And today, this one is, I don't think you're going to get in trouble with this one. So you might. I don't know. I mean, I know my answer. This one's pretty straightforward. This is from Mom of 3. And her question is Halloween or Christmas?
Oh, for me? Or do we all answer?
We all answer.
Well, we're all
but
going to
you
answer.
first.
So you can go first.
Christmas.
Christmas.
Yes.
We all know
Solid.
Brett's answer.
Solid. I mean, Christmas is fine. No shame in that. What about you, Alice?
Oh no, Brett. What is your
Mine is
favorite holiday
Halloween,
of all time?
obviously.
Of course.
Halloween is.
I'll be
and
the
then followed
tiebreaker
closely
because
by Christmas.
everybody knows it's Christmas. We have entire channels dedicated to the holiday.
We have entire channels dedicated
In
to Halloween,
fact-
sort of, kind of.
Sort of, kind of. In fact, you could also argue that all true crime is dedicated to Halloween. But
much.
I am. In fact, I just put a calendar on my calendar, a girls' night, where we're going to watch some Christmas movies in May.
See, I think the problem is, and I don't understand, if you're out there listening to this, Hallmark, you can do this. I won't even demand any money from it. You need to have Halloween movies just like you have Christmas movies. If there's no reason not to have Halloween romantic comedies where people go to the quaint little New England town that's obsessed with Halloween and maybe solve a murder or something. You got to throw something in there like that. I mean,
Like
I just think that would be fantastic. There you go, like Salem.
No. I think if anything, so Julia, you may not know this, but when we do October episodes, which are Halloween, really they're true crime cases. They're like axe murders, 20% of our listeners are like, see ya. That never happens around Christmas time. Now, we don't do them Christmas themed either, but I'm just saying there's not, the market is in it for Christmas. So if you're following the viewerships, then it's going to be Christmas.
There's still true crime during October, though. Why don't they not listen?
Julia,
This is the question.
we need the
psychology
BAU on this.
It's the marketing.
It is the marketing.
It's
It is
the marketing,
absolutely
I
the
think.
marketing. Mhm.
I think they think that it's going to be maybe not typical true crime, not real true crime.
Even though it is. We did that case we talked to you about, the guy from Canada who was making the movie or whatever. And
Oh, Twitch.
Mark Twitchell. We did that one during the Halloween season. That's pure true crime. I mean, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The marketing's too good. We're too good at the marketing. So that's okay. All right. Well, that's fine. I'm happy being out on an island by myself. I know there's some Halloween folks out there with me.
I love Halloween too, but I love Christmas more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is Christmas your favorite holiday?
Yes.
Solid
I assume
answer.
it's
Yes.
your favorite holiday as well, Alice. It's my second
So
favorite.
magic. Okay, well, at least you're
so
not
is
a monster.
Halloween. Halloween is magical. Arguably, Halloween is more magical than Christmas. There are witches.
Different kind of magical, but okay, we'll give you that. You know what? It is like super late for Julia. I
Yeah,
I
that's
always
true.
remember that she is on Eastern time, and you always humor us and come on so late. And I know that you are a fan favorite for a good reason. We are just so lucky to
Thank
have
you.
you
Well,
on our show. Thank you.
I'm your fans, or your fan. That's how I met you.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, that's just,
Yeah.
I don't know, that warms my heart. It warms my heart. Did you say that?
I was just chopping vegetables one night, listening to Brett, and I'm like, I have to text him. This is not right.
Which she did. I feel like the first time I missed your message because I think you sent two. I think it was the second one that I was like,
No, I sent you one.
was it the first one? Okay.
Yeah. No,
Well-
I just sent you through Twitter. I think I sent
It
you
was
a
through Twitter.
message, and you wrote me back right away. I was shocked. I thought he's not going to answer. Why? But I'm just going to tell him what I think anyway. Like
I
a,
love
like
I was
a
like,
crazy
come on the show.
fan,
Come on the show.
a crazy fan who just thinks
Crazy
that
fan.
I can reach right out to this person. I also figured, I had a little bit of, clout because I did the work that I was going to complain to you about.
It's true. Yes.
You absolutely have had and have the clout.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
like I was a profiler, and I don't think you realize it, but you are actually pretty good at it. I don't think you know what it is.
It was like the nicest criticism of all time.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I'm very glad to have you as a friend, not only as someone who comes on our podcast. And I wish you were going to be at CrimeCon because we're going to miss you, but maybe next year.
But
Yeah.
congratulations again to your daughter for graduating.
Congratulations again.
Yeah. Thank you. It'll be
All right.
fun.
Well, it is late. Alice is right. I could talk to Julia all night long. I can't help myself, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. Julia, I hope you'll help us in our sign off. We'll be back next week. But until then, I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
And I'm Julia.
and this is The Prosecutors. You're not
Right, can you
delayed
hear
for me. I can hear you. Am I delayed?
I think it's better that you don't actually have like huge ideas about those, because that's a whole behavioral analysis, right? When you get tunnel vision that it has to be, D. Brett Cooper, then
D.
you're
Brett
not gonna look
Cooper.
anywhere else. D. Brett Cooper.
See, I've been
That's right.
sick, so I feel like I can't smoke my cigarette tonight. Julia, I'm gonna let you do all the talking because I'm like, man.
Oh no.
You sound worse than yesterday, Brett. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I'll survive.
Okay. Oh wait, no. This is you have to do a descriptor.
Yeah. Oh, I do. Oh man.
You can do it.
Sorry, Sophie. Let's see. Oh, I guess I can use another one from the kids.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's see.
I also forgot to think. I forgot to say. I think DB Cooper is an Oregonian.
What makes
Is
you
that
say
right?
that? You're
Oh,
gonna
wow,
like
yeah.
leave that as that's a great clip.
Just
Why?
thought of that.
Why?
Well, I guess he could really be from other places too, but just the way he's described kind of being nice and stuff, I'm like, he's
People
an
from
Oregonian.
Washington aren't nice.
No, or
Really?
California. I just feel like it just seemed like an Oregonian. And I remember I had a coworker, she was from New Jersey, and she took a vacation to Oregon, and she was like on my squad, and she came back and she said, "Oh my God, the people in Oregon are so annoying. They're so nice." And she said, like, when they talk to you, they sound like they're singing. And I said, that's what being nice is like. That's what it sounds like when people are nice. So every time I'd see her, I'd be like, "Hello, April," every time, just to annoy her. But yeah, so when I was kind of reading through how he was talking, I'm like, he's got to be an Oregonian. He's too nice. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah, because you can be like,
the Canadian, theory with the comic book, right?
yeah. Well, I think people say, well, he's nice, so he's a Canadian. He's nice, so he's Oregonian. He's nice, so he must be a Midwesterner. He could also, but he didn't have an accent, so he's not a Southerner. So he's definitely not a Northeasterner. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's like the best little mic drop right there. Guys, I know
Sorry.
exactly who he is. Did I forget to mention that?
I don't really think that. I just kind of thought if he had to be somewhere from the West Coast, he probably is Oregon. He left from Portland. He jumped out near
Yeah.
Portland. He's,
Interesting. So he
but
maybe really did make it to Thanksgiving on time.
maybe.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think
We
he fell in
solved
the
it.
water.
I knew you would solve this.
Pluto TV has over 300 channels and thousands of TV shows and movies for whatever mood you're in. Just open the app and something good will already be playing because it's curated by people who love TV as much as you do. So if you're in the mood for comedy, there's 18 channels that'll make you laugh. Looking for drama? We got so much of it, you'll cry tears of joy. Reality shows, game shows, sports, Star Trek, and even more Star Trek. No matter what mood you're in, there's something on Pluto TV. Just download the app and start streaming. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.